class, what we will cover, we're going to talk about how the Light-O-Rama programs combined, how to set up a new sequence, the visualizer turning into the preview, where all of the buttons moved. We'll spend a lot of our time on that. The new keyboard shortcuts, a lot of things got added and they make life a lot easier. The color fade and motion effects, so kind of how the pixel editor got integrated into the sequencer, and then what happened to the timing grids and tracks. What we will not be covering. We're not going to go in depth into building previews. We will talk briefly about where some of the buttons are, but I'm not going to spend my time literally drawing out a display. We're also not going to go through all 30 of the motion effects. I will talk about how to create them, but I'm not going through and saying, this is a spiral, this is a single block. We don't have time for that. We're not going to really go into creativity of sequencing a show, which pains me a little bit since that's what I love to do. But there's lots of other classes today that are going over that, and I really want to focus on buttons. And then we will not be talking about superstar sequencing because there's an entire class dedicated to that right after this, and that's done by the creator himself, so he'll have a lot more information. So here's a diagram about how the Light-O-Rama programs came together, and I'm going to start on the right side. So in S4, we were used to the show editor and the schedule editor. That was how you built your shows when you were ready to have them run. Those two programs still exist, but now you access them through something called the Light-O-Rama Hub. And so if you go into Hub, both of those editors will be there along the top. They will open exactly as you're used to. You just go through a different program to get to them. So do not be scared. Those are basically the same. What is different is over on the left. So in S4, we had 3 distinct programs that you used to sequence. Superstar was an add-on option. So we had the sequence editor, the pixel editor, and the visualizer. And all of those have come together into what's called the sequencer. So no longer do you have to import pixel editor sequences into your sequence editor to make motion effects run. It's all in one place. And now within the S5 sequencer, you access Superstar through the sequencer program. So you can still get to it, still add it into your sequences, but it's also not a separate entity that you have to import into your sequence. So they really brought everything together, and that's why it looks different, because they combined all of these programs, and that's why the buttons moved around. So if you were to actually click on that little preview tab, this is your new visualizer. This is where you go to build your display. And unlike S4, you have to build a preview, otherwise you cannot build a sequence, because we need to be able to see what we are doing and how our lights are interacting from a live standpoint. So you have to build your preview first. When you click this pop-out tab, it's going to show you these buttons along the top. This plus button will do add new preview, and it'll pop up a window that we will go through a little bit later, and that's when you can create the visualization, the preview that you were used to creating in S4 visualizer. Pencil means edit, X means delete, this button means copy, and then this button over on the right is if you want to import your S4 visualizer. So for those of you who are worried that if you come up to S5, you're going to have to redraw everything, false. You can import your visualizer. Everything will come over just fine. You may want to change things because S5 has some new prop shapes that will make things cleaner than they were in visualizer, but all of your data is going to be there. So don't worry, you don't have to redo things. You can actually import that animation block style picture from way back when I first started sequencing. So that even can come over and import. Again, you're probably going to want to change the prop shapes because it looks cleaner. One of the big differences between S4 and S5 is that when you created your visualizer in S4, it saved as a file. Like that was a visualization, that was a visualizer file. In S5, you must export your preview if you want to share it, have a backup, import it somewhere else. You have to do that export. It exists inside the sequencer until you put it somewhere else. Likewise, if you need to import an S5 preview, your option is over here in the drop down as well. And lastly, that little question mark, it just goes to the help menu with Light-O-Rama, which in building this class I have discovered is extremely extensive. So if you ever need help with anything Light-O-Rama related, they have tons and tons of documentation. So when you start a new sequence, which again, I can't show you in the editor because it'll show my previews, these are the two boxes that you will see for the varying sequences. So animation's over on the left, music is on the right. It's going to ask you who the sequence author is, and then it's going to ask you to pick a preview. So if you were to click that drop down, you would see every preview available to you. You will likely only have one, whereas I have like 50. So that's where that's useful for me. You can also click quick preview if you have not built your preview already, and it'll take you to the window and you can build it at this point. But I do recommend building your preview before you try to start sequencing. You should be used to all of the other settings down below with animation and musical settings. That's not any different. The only thing is at the bottom when it says number of motion effect rows for pixel props, that's going to default to 2, and that will be relevant later. So just leave that. That's only for pixel lights. If you have AC lights, you can completely ignore that. It doesn't matter. If you modify a preview, which after you have already created it, so the previews in S5 attach to every sequence that uses it. So in S4, if you edited your channel configuration over in the sequence editor, you had to also go edit something in the visualizer. Here they are connected, and every time you edit your preview, it will automatically change every sequence that uses that preview. So that is awesome because you do not have to make changes in every single one of their shows, every single one of your shows. However, if you try to make a change and then you don't reopen the new sequence, it will yell at you if you try to add it to a show editor or an SD card, because it's like, wait, you made changes. I have old data. So just make sure you update that before hitting OK. So if you are trying to upgrade your S4 sequences, again, do not be scared. You can bring all of them over into S5. No, you do not need to recreate everything that you've already done. So when you import your S4 sequence, it's going to tell you it needs to convert it. Your options for your preview source, I would recommend using the existing preview. This preview, again, that you have already built prior to getting to this point. The second option is you can import your S4 visualizer. So remember we saw that over in the other screen, it's giving you another chance to say, hey, you really don't need to redo all your work. Do you want to import your S4 visualizer file? You can import the animation block style one, or you can auto-generate. I would recommend not doing this because when you bring an S4 sequence over, it doesn't magically know what your house looks like. It will bring over all of your channels correctly, like the channel grid that you're used to seeing in the S4 sequence editor, but the visual will be a bunch of stars in a row and it will be essentially useless to you from a visual standpoint. So moral of the story, please build your preview before you start importing your sequences. The beat channels at the bottom, if you had any blank channels in your S4 sequences like I did, you can choose how they come over and how they appear in the new sequence. After you click OK for this box, you might get a warning that says, hey, these props aren't in your display. What do you want to do with them? So this would be if you purchase a sequence or get a shared sequence and things might not exactly line up, you might get a warning about archived props. And we will go over archive props in a little bit, but just be aware that there might be a warning. So over in your sequence editor, your sequence menu up at the top, here's where I was talking about the media file, changing the sequence length, adding new beat channels. And then the last two important things I want to point out in this menu are that you can assign a different preview if you want to change the layout that you're using. And you can also manage your archived props. Again, archived props are the things that went away when you imported a sequence. Tools menu, here's where your beat wizard and tapper wizard went. You can also change your sequencer preferences. So go ahead and look at these. You can change a whole ton of things about how your sequence is set up. Window is really important. So these three tabs over on the side are used for various things. If any of these three tabs ever disappear because you accidentally close them, go to Window and they will appear here and you can go ahead and put them back. So that's a common question I see in the forums is, I don't see the preview tab over on the right side. Go to window and put it back. And then the help menu will get you to all of your Light-O-Rama questions that you could ever want to know. All right, so now we're going to go into editing the preview a little bit. So there are multiple ways you can get to editing your preview. You can either click this right here. This is the name of your preview. It's going to have the green check mark by it. You can go into sequence and click preview design, or you can pop out the preview tab, which I'm not going to, and you can get to it there. So many ways to get to editing your sequence. If you click this button, this is what the new visualizer looks like. This is how everything moved. So this looks a little scary. I promise you it's not. It's actually pretty straightforward. So the first thing that I want to bring to your attention is down here at the bottom, these tabs, the background tab. Here's how you set your image for your background, and then you can begin drawing your lights. To add a new prop in your preview, you're going to click add new, and this menu is going to pop up. So you've got a lot of different options, and it's been about 5 years since I built something in the visualizer, that's a tongue twister sometimes, in S4, so I don't completely remember all of the options. One of the main things that you will do is click add new prop. When you add new prop, this menu is going to show up, and you're going to have all these preset shapes to choose from. You can choose what color everything is. You can pick your channels over on the side. You name your prop. To me, this is a lot cleaner than the visualizer was. So spend some time exploring this. I'm hoping that the preview building gets covered a little bit more in the S5 class later on. But if not, Light-O-Rama actually has a pretty good preview building video on YouTube that you can go ahead and watch. If you have an RGB prop, all you have to do is switch the tab over to here, and you can go ahead and change those settings. Motion effect rows, as I mentioned earlier, which we will get back to, that's how you create different RGB effects. If you use the pixel editor, you're used to this. If you only have AC lights, completely ignore everything I say about RGB. The one important thing that I want to draw your attention to is if you have multiple fixtures that are sharing the same channel. In the visualizer, I believe you could just create them and they would be controlled fine. You could have duplicate channels. Here, you have to tell the prop that it's okay to use the channels as same channels as its master prop. So if you're getting errors, it's probably over here because you didn't tell it it was okay to have duplicates. So once you create a prop, it's going to look like this. It's going to come over into your window. Everything's going to be alphabetical in your preview window. There's nothing you can do about that. You can change it later down in the actual sequencer. You can also add groups of things. So this is different from S4. In S4, you had to build multiple tracks to put things in different orders. Here, you can create groups of your props, and your props can go in as many groups as they want. So if I want to put all 16 of those little white and blue bushes in a group, they can be in their own separate group. But if I want to put these 16 bushes plus these 4 bushes in a group, that can also be in a group. And it's not going to yell at you because a prop is in 2 places at once. So that's completely fine. And in one of my opinion, one of the best upgrades for S5. You can also add Light-O-Rama devices directly. I haven't found a ton of use for this other than the CMB24s. Generally, it's easier to build a prop or to draw a new shape. If you have an S5 prop file that maybe someone shared with you, like they built a specialized mega tree, or you built something in your own preview and you need to export it somewhere else, you can import an S5 prop file. You can also import a visualizer file. So again, they're really trying to remind you that you do not need to redraw everything. So multiple chances to import that S4 visualizer. These last 5 options, there are a couple of vendors that have worked with Light-O-Rama, and they have some of their props ready for import. So Busgoyo in particular has 1 million of them. I'm not going to click on that because it takes absolutely forever to load the library. But all you have to do is click on the prop you want to import, and they'll come right over with all the channels ready to be assigned. Down here, you can change the scale of a prop, or you can just go ahead and drag it And again, edit undo is your best friend. There are some options for formatting up here at the top where you can put your props in alignment with each other. You can change the sizes. Basically, this is just a way to keep things really clean when you're building your preview. If we go, yeah, okay, so we can modify, copy, delete, general options. And if you right click, you can export the selected prop, or if we make a group, select multiple things, we can export all of them. So 5 seconds ago, when I said that you can import an S5 prop, this is how you export an S5 prop. There are a couple other tabs along the top here. So this channel conflicts and bulk changes will tell you if there are any channels that have the same channels as something else that aren't allowed to. So for example, if I change this to be channel 13, which it should not, this is going to give me a little yellow warning symbol telling me, hey, these two things are on the same channel and they shouldn't be because you didn't let them know they could have a master prop. So if you come into this channel, this tab, you can click on whatever prop is having the problem. You can change it, save update, and now you don't have any problems anymore. This is also the new place for your grid configuration window in S4. When you opened up that giant window, you could see all of your controllers. You could bulk edit a controller number. You could delete entire controllers. That's where this is now. So if we click all props, I can go ahead and take controller 3, for example. And if I highlight everything here, there's an option that says change. And you can change all of these varying parameters. But if you click set unit ID, we're going to pretend I want to set this to controller 12. And it's all changed, except I have my megatree on 12, so that's obviously not an option. I can also put these back so that we don't break anything. But that is the new place to bulk edit. So that is your grid configuration from the S4 window, the grid configuration. Other warnings, if there are other warnings that are not channel related, they're going to pop up here. String summary is great if you need to print out a spreadsheet for when you're walking around your yard and saying what do things need to be plugged into. And statistics are just fun facts about your display. Make sure you hit save anytime you make changes. Do not hit X. If you make a change, be very careful, because if you tell it, do you want to close without changing, it will close the entire preview editor and you will lose everything that you have done. So save often, or you will be unhappy with the work that you have to redo. All right, yep, here's the box. No, I actually don't want to save any of my changes. We're good. Oh yes, I do want to save without closing. That's where it trips me up. Okay, so remember we talked about the archived props. So archived props will show up if the sequence has more props than are actually in your preview. So we see these 4 columns at the bottom right now. This little symbol means that yes, these are valid channels. They are working just fine. If I come in here and I get these 4 columns deleted, I click save, this suddenly now has a little @ symbol, which means they exist in your grid, but they will not actually control lights because you don't have anything connected to them in your preview. If you accidentally delete things or you're having a shared sequence brought over that you're trying to figure out, all you need to do is come up to sequence, manage archived props. It's going to tell you exactly what is archived. You can go ahead and select all of those and put them right back. And their symbol comes back to normal. So don't worry about archived props. You can get them back. All right, now we are actually going to go down to the sequence menu. Let me just make sure I'm caught up here in PowerPoint slides. We did preview building, we did archive props, and now we're going to play a really fun game of where's that button. So if we look over in the sequence editor, we're going to focus on this top row first. Here's what you're used to in S4. This is what everything turned into in S5 for this menu. This is not that different, actually. So the only different things are this paste by cell mode, which we will talk about. That's new in this menu, and the speed. The nudge buttons are new if you want to shift your effect over a little bit, and the visibility buttons are new. But otherwise, these buttons basically all came down into this toolbar. If we go over into the sequence editor really quick, these two new buttons over here, these are basically just a toggle to hide things. So if we click playback window, that'll go away. You can also pop this out and move it wherever you want. So I can put it on the bottom if I want to. I can pop it out and have it be a completely new window. Just do not attach it to the center because for some reason that doesn't run very well. So you can go ahead and put this wherever you want or toggle it if you don't want to see it. Same thing with the waveform. You can go ahead and get rid of that in a musical sequence if you do not want to see it. Okay, so this is basically the same. The change options for pace by cell, time, stretch to fit, and repeat to fit, that is now in that top toolbar, as is changing the speed of your sequence. So here, this little drop down, here's those 4 options that you're used to. Here's where it moves. You can also put your clipboards right here, so you can still add those clipboards that you're used to. And then here, you can go ahead and change the speed of the sequence. So again, those buttons are not lost, they just moved. The timings were over on the far right in S4, and they're in a very similar place over in S5. So your timing grids, if you drop down, you can see your different options that you have for the sequence. And by clicking this drop down arrow, you can go ahead and add a new fixed grid, freeform grid, copy, all sorts of options. So if we go ahead and add a new fixed grid, sure. And then it toggles here, and so you can go ahead and switch between those. So that just moved over onto the right side of S5. This is the really fun one. This is the scary one that I would argue makes people want to go to S4. And this is really not that intimidating if we just break it down and talk about what is actually being asked. So this is this set of buttons right down here. And we're going to walk through these logically to talk about how you actually create effects. So this is the logic that you need to think through when you are placing an effect in S5. The reason this is different is because we brought 3 pieces of software into one. So naturally things are going to change. So the first thing you need to decide is what type of effect you are placing. So over in the sequence editor, that's the 4th option here. So the channel is for using AC channels. If you have no RGB in your display, you will never change this type option. So if you don't have RGB, don't even worry about this box. It's going to default the channel and you're going to be fine. That color symbol, you're used to that from S4. That was when you could go ahead and make color fades with RGB effects. That's another option for type. The 3rd one is to create motion effects for RGB lights. So if you pick that, you will see a menu very similar to the pixel editor if you ever use that feature. And if you click Superstar, that will allow you to connect over into the Superstar program and bring effects back from that. Once you've selected the type of lights that you will be controlling, you then need to choose what type of effect you will be using. 95% of the time, you're going to be using the on effect. That basically just means do whatever action you're selecting at normal values. So basically not shimmer and twinkle. If you select shimmer and twinkle and then do a fade down, it will make the fade down in shimmer or twinkle form. I don't personally use the DMX feature, but if people use DMX effects, that's where that button is as well. So you picked your type of lights, you've picked the type of effect you're using. You will likely not change these buttons very often. The key for how you're going to program comes in the select action box. So you have 2 main options for how you're going to program in S5. If you use the select key, that means when you click, it will just click into a box and no effects will actually take place. We are used to that button from S4. If you click create, that means when you click in the box, whatever effect you have set will get placed. This is the type of programming you are used to in S4. So if you use select, you will be using keyboard shortcuts, and if you use create, you will be clicking. Also in that select action box, There is toggle, fill, chase, and intensity is a little bit different, but toggle, fill, and chase are nothing new. You're used to those buttons. But again, if you have that select action highlighted and you are clicked into one of those, when you click, it will do that action. If you select the drop down for chase, which I will show you when we go back into the editor, there's some other options for chase, but basically, moral of the story, you use select, keyboard shortcuts, or you can just click and nothing will happen. If you click on create or anything else in here, when you click, the effect will go into the box. The effects are down here in range and slope. This is what's a little bit different. So if I go back a slide, over here in S4, we had these two buttons off to the side where if you clicked on them, you could change the intensity or you could change the fade ranges. And then when you went over and clicked, fade or intensity, those are the ranges it would use. And I believe there were 10 presets you could choose from for each of them. In S5, there is now a little range button where you set the range right here, and whatever effect you're using, it will take those ranges. So here's your minimum, here's your maximum. And you can go ahead and drop down this arrow to go to some presets, which again, I will show you once we go back into S5. Lastly, these buttons you should also be familiar with. They just kind of have different names. So maximum means that the effect will be placed at whatever the maximum value is here in range. So a lot of the times range is going to be set to 0 and 100 because that's the normal full range value. Maximum will go at 100, minimum will go at 0 for this specific example. And if you use the fades up and down, it would go from 0 to 100. So thinking through this before we go back to S5, what type of lights am I using? What kind of effect do I want to place? Do I want to use keyboard shortcuts, or do I want things to actually happen when I click? And then setting the parameters for what happens when you click or use the keyboard shortcuts. What is my range that I'm working with? And then what effect am I actually placing? And again, this is taking place of these buttons right back here over to the right. So if we go back into the sequencer, I will show you some of those drop downs we talked about. So chase, there's a couple options here where you can have the selection not clear, you can have it go by row. So go ahead and play with that and see what works for what you're trying to do, but it will default to what you're used to in S5. This range one, if you click here, it's going to show you some of these common presets. And if I click this, this range is automatically going to change. I can also use these toggle arrows if I want to, or I can just type in this box. There's many ways to do that. If you want to make specific ones unique to you, you can go ahead and add those in. Oh, I think I have to name it. And it will create a new preset for you so that you can go to specific ranges. So that is where that box moves to. If we click on a different type, this effect thing will change, which we will get into when we go to each of these individually. But for now, this is the new board that we want to focus on. So I talked a second ago about using keyboard shortcuts. So if we use create, it puts it in the box. If we use select, we get to click and press a whole bunch of fun letters, and the effects will happen at a lot faster pace. So if you use keyboard shortcuts, here's what you need to pay attention to. Essentially, what range is going on with your effects, because when you press the keyboard shortcuts, it's just going to automatically tap into those minimum and maximum values. So if we go back over here, I'm going to show you actually placing some of these effects. So we're going to use create, which means everything that I click, I'm going to go to 0 to 25. Everything that I click is actually going to be placed. So if I click maximum, it's going to happen at 100%. If I click minimum, it's going to happen 25% there. Down, up. If I want to click maximum again and do a chase, I can go ahead and drag this. If I want to do a toggle, it'll change it. We're all very familiar with these tools. They just look a little bit different. So if we use the actual clicking method, that's the pace that you're going to be working at, which you can totally do because that's what you're used to in S4. If you use the keyboard shortcuts, I can make that same pattern by using all of these. So Light-O-Rama has a very extensive keyboard shortcut page that you can go ahead and visit. These are some of the common ones. There are new keyboard shortcuts that got put into S5 that were not there in S4, but a lot of these are similar. The most common ones you'll use are over here: A for maximum, I for minimum, U for up, D for down. I use these toggle, chase, and fill quite a bit. There are other ones, but these are the common ones you're going to use. And if you need to get into there from Light-O-Rama S5, here's the file path that you take to get there, or you can just search it when you are on their site. So if I wanted to make the same pattern, I would click on select, and instead of clicking back and forth between every single command that I want to do, all I have to do is press A, I, D, U, and we'll do a chase, we'll do a toggle, and we'll do a fill. So that goes a lot faster if you use the keyboard shortcuts, but it does take a moment to remember them. So moral of the story, there are two ways that you can sequence in S5, and it's really just a matter of personal preference with if you want to use the keyboard shortcuts or if you want to click and have things happen like you are used to. So we are going to now go into the different kind of types we have here. So color transitions is our first one. If we click on the color type, we're going to get a new menu over here. So whenever you switch between these, this effect box is going to change and say, what on earth do you actually want to do with this effect? Go ahead and set your parameters. So we're used to these buttons. This is actually pretty similar to S4. If you click here, you can go ahead and change the colors. You can also change the colors by going here and clicking this. Same box. That's a really bad combination. You can randomize it. You can copy it over. We can have the last one ignored because it's the same color. This is not really that new. It's just this is how you get to it by pressing the color button. You do want to be careful thinking through your effect placements when you're using the color transition. So remember this minimum and maximum value thing here. So if we want to do a maximum value with blue, it's going to put blue in all of these boxes because it wants the maximum value of this. But if we use the up command, it's going to fade from black all the way up to full blue because we've said go from 0 to 100, the max of this color. So just think through the logic there on that one. If something's not happening the way you want it to, just think through the logic of what you are clicking with your different effects. If we go over to motion effects, that is this button here. So when you click motion effects, all of your fun effect things are going to go away because we don't actually need them anymore. And there are 3 options for how you can place motion effects. So how do you know if an element is set up to receive motion effects? It's going to have a black row. That means it is RGB ready to take commands. If you have any props in your sequence that have this crosshatch white and black line, it means it is set up for an RGB coding, but you did not tell it it could have any motion rows. So it can accept effects, but it really can't. So if you right click here, we can get to add or modify motion effect rows. And we can go ahead and add some of those back. So when we are adding these motion effect rows, this is just saying how many different layers of effects do you want to have on your RGB props. You can subdivide this. So if you want to break your, I can't do rows because it's an arch. If you want to break it into rows or columns, you can subdivide that way. So that's really fun for divvying up your effects and making them look a little bit different. And then you can truly add as many of these as you want. You really don't need 8 full prop effects, but this is just for demonstration purposes. So if we drop this down, I now see that I have 8 different effect layers that I could put on my arch for RGB effects. In order to place a motion effect, you have 3 options. You can create a new effect, which is what you will be using most of the time. You can use playback, meaning whatever effect is currently showing in the window, you can go ahead and use that and put it on a different prop or somewhere later in the sequence. It's basically going to say whatever's showing right now, yes, that is my source of what I'm using. Or you can use effect samples over in your favorites, which I will show you once I go through how to create the motion effects. So be careful with your motion effects placing them. So if you are using Create and you click New, right now, I need to make sure I have max selected so that it goes at full force. We're going to put this on the mega tree. It's going to pop up this window. And for example, we can just use spirals. Okay, it's going to place it there. If I had these settings wrong and for some reason I was on minimum, if I try to place this here, I say spirals, okay, nothing's going to show up because I have told the program to place that motion effect at minimum value, which I currently have set to 0. So if your motion effects are not showing up, check these two windows first because that's probably your culprit. If I use the select tool and click on a motion effect, you now see that this playback source is not grayed out. So if I take this playback saying, yes, that's my source, and I'm going to go ahead and put this at a maximum value somewhere else. I can go ahead and click over here and it's going to be the exact same effect. So that's a great way to kind of shortcut a little bit and you don't have to recreate the effects every time. So samples. Over in the color type, we have this little favorite box over here, where if you want to save a favorite color, it will show up over here in this giant list. So I already have blue. What else can I add? We'll do this light purple. So if I click Save to Favorite, it's now going to show up over in this color palette. So if I click any of these colors, that's a really easy way to quickly change things. Transitions, you can also save as favorites. So there's a shortcut here. And then with the motion effects, if you go over here and we open back up this window, there's a little favorites thing down here. So if we go to favorites, we can go ahead and save any of these effects and they will pop up over on the side, over into favorites. So here's a way you can get to some of the effects you have favorited or you have used in the sequence already so that you're not trying to recreate them every single time. But back to the motion effects. So when this window pops up, you've got your left side and you've got your right side, which is the first step in blending different effects together. So you can go ahead and select from this drop down, and every single one of these is going to give you a whole wide variety of sliders to play with, so you can change the effect parameters and make something unique instead of just using whatever is out of the box. If you only use AC lights, please feel free to completely ignore this part of the presentation as it does not pertain to you. If you uncheck any of these boxes and unlock them, you can change your ramp. So we're going to say that over the course of this effect, we want the meteor count to go from 11 to 100. So basically, this is just a rabbit hole of different ways that you can mix effects. And if we put something on the side over here, it's probably look terrible. This drop down is all these different ways that you can blend the effects together. So whatever looks good to you, you can go ahead and save that to your prop. And then if that still isn't enough, you can create layers underneath this and just keep going and adding effects until it looks so chaotic that it doesn't really look good anymore. But basically, you can create different combinations of motion effects inside this window, and you can also use layers to put them on top of each other. So this is a really fun window to play in. Go ahead and experiment, check out the different effects, and I assume this will be talked about more in the S5 sequencing class later this afternoon. So there's a couple buttons that we didn't talk about way back in that toolbar from S4. So the foreground and background buttons, we have not seen those in any of the toolbars. Where'd they go? So in S5, we have the right-click menus. So if I right-click, we get all of these lovely effects. And the ones I'm going to point you towards immediately are the background and foreground. So if you go into either of these menus, you can insert effects in background and foreground. So if we go, where did I have all my effects? I'm throwing over an animation. I'll make new ones. Okay, so motion effect, I want to be on channel. I just make a bunch of effects here. And I say that in the background, I want to insert toolbar effect at max intensity everywhere I have my background. Well, what is my max intensity right now? I have it set from 0 to 100, and maximum would be 100. So if I click this, everywhere behind it will turn 100%. Remember that a background only exists once, so you cannot put a background over somewhere that has all of its effects. So make sure you undo if you want to change that. If you want to change the foreground effect, let's say I want to fade up each effect instead. Oops, those weren't supposed to be down. I can go ahead and change all of those with a simple click of a button instead of having to go change each one individually. I can also fade down across the entire selection. There's a whole bunch of new options in here that were not in S4. But the moral of the story is those buttons moved to the right click menu. There are also some new effects in here. So you can completely create new effects, prompting for new effects, or you can get to all of the effects we've been talking about by using the right click menu. Personally, I think that takes a little bit longer, so I wouldn't recommend it, but just know this is another way to sequence. If you go into advanced tools, here's some of those other options like toggle and fading up and down the cells. Next game of where's that button? So where did our tracks go? Tracks are over here. And in S5, here's the new terminology. So the visualizer turned into the preview, your channel configuration turned into what's called the grid configuration, and your tracks also turned into the grid configuration. So essentially, if you're going to come up to S5, you need to remove the word track from your vocabulary. Over on the side, you see this kind of looks like our channel configuration that we're used to from S4. You've got all your props over on the side. Normally in S4, if you wanted them in a different order, you had to create multiple tracks because you could only put them in one order, or props could only be in one group. Here, if you click this drop-down icon, you can add a new view, and this is your grid configuration. We're going to call this VSC example. And this window is going to pop up and ask you, what do you want added to your new view? So you can go ahead and pop all of these down and see absolutely everything that you have in your sequence. Now, I would recommend that if you are going to create groups of your props, you do so at the preview level, because then it will translate to all of your other sequences. So we're going to do that now before we actually build our new grid view. So if I come back into our preview, I'm going to say I want these little bushes to be in a group because sometimes I want to sequence those together. So I'll highlight them all, add a new group. We'll call them little bushes. Oops, I can spell. Wow, okay. And I will go ahead and click save. So if we scroll down, we see that these little bushes now exist. And you'll see that the sequencing is in both places. So you do not have to put the effects in both. It will automatically show up. So just like there, if I delete it, you can see both of them disappear. So that's where that's really useful. So back to creating the new view. I want to bring over all of my props. Except, just kidding, I don't really need all of these little bushes individually because I have that group, and that'll just make things a lot cleaner. So go ahead and get rid of those. And then over in groups, I'll say, let's bring little bushes over. And that will show up in blue to show me that it's a group. So if I click OK, I now have this new configuration, which is what you're used to with a track. I can go ahead and move these around. It doesn't matter. But you'll notice that those individual little bushes are gone. They are now in this handy dandy drop down because I put them in the preview as a group. So this will really clean up your sequences. If you want to add groups in your grid configuration because maybe one song needs a specific group, but you really don't need that in your preview, you have the option to right-click and convert to grid view group. So this is groups from S4, which you're used to. And I can say, let's call this example, and I can say go down to upper window 4. This is a familiar concept. So we have everything nice and organized. Yeah, so I would recommend doing this in the preview first, just because it's a little bit cleaner. If you need to export this grid configuration because you need to put it into a different sequence, if you click this button again, you can go ahead and click grid configuration and you can export that. So you can import it into all of your new sequences, and that option is there as well. The grid configuration is not attached to your preview. Those are two separate entities, just like the visualizer and your grid configuration. Your channel configuration in S4 were two separate entities. If you want to change your grid view, you can go ahead and say append items to view. So this is essentially your giant edit button. If we decide, okay, actually we do kind of want those little bushes back, but we only want 4 of them for some reason, I can go ahead and add those in and they'll show up at the bottom. And if I say, just kidding, why did I do that? I can go ahead and hide all of those items because I am in a grid view. If you are over in show all items, you do not have the option to get rid of things because you need to do that at the preview level. And so creating a grid view allows you to edit as needed, change things around, and get rid of having multiple tracks because again, your props can be in multiple groups. I think I missed a slide somewhere. So we are going to talk about where your timings went. So if you click this right grid menu again, there's this box down here that says timing marks, and I'm in a fixed timing grid, so I can't do that. Okay, so if we right click and look in the timing mark menu, here's where insert timings, subdivide timings, multiple timings, delete timings, that's where that all went. So that's in the right click menu. If we look up here in our timing grids, we see that this little box is locked. If I right click, that means I have to go down to the bottom, click timing mark, and then I get into this menu. If I unlock this, this means that I can right click and that menu is immediately there. So it's a shortcut. If this is unlocked, I can move my timings. If it is locked, I cannot. And so that's a feature upgrade that I like from S4 because I accidentally moved timings a lot when I was trying to place my effect. So this is a really great way to make sure you're not doing that. And if you want to change your timings and you cannot, this is going to be the culprit, unlocking or locking this box. Last thing, control lights. So over here, we talked about these sidebar windows. This is your previews. You can get to your effect samples. Here's where you can control your lights. So if you want to see what's actually happening on plugged in lights while you're in your sequencer, you can go ahead and check this little box. And if there's lights attached, you can go ahead and do that from here. Your lights off now button from way back in the menu, that's where this went now. So if you need to suddenly turn everything off, and then you can also get over to your network preferences from this button as well. So in review, we kind of went through a lot of different crazy topics in focus of where did the buttons move to. We talked about how the pixel editor and the sequence editor and the visualizer are now into one thing called the sequencer, and you can get to Superstar from within the sequencer. To set up a sequence, you do not have to completely redo all of your S4 sequences. You can go ahead and import them after you've built a preview, which is the new term for a visualizer from S4. To do the preview, you want to do that before you start building any of your sequences. And again, you can import your S4 visualizer. You do not have to completely recreate it. We talked about how the tools menus changed. The big thing was that there's now kind of two options to sequence. We can either use the keyboard shortcuts by clicking on select, or we can use the create button and put effects in the boxes exactly when they happen. We talked about some of the main keyboard shortcuts, and then we went through the different types of lights. So effects that we could put down, either AC lights, the color fades, or the motion effects, which came through from the pixel editor. And we kind of briefly went through how to place the motion effects and those color effects. And lastly, we also talked about timing grids and how that's now in the upper right corner. You can go ahead and add new timing grids. The controlling the speed of the lights moved to that main toolbar instead of being somewhere else. And then we discussed how tracks are now a grid configuration, and you don't really need multiple tracks anymore. You just need one grid view and your life should be fine. So if you still need help, Light-O-Rama, again, has a very extensive library of material. If you open any of those little book icons in the Light-O-Rama help menu, you'll open a laundry list of specific topics. And the S5 sequencer has a ton of information. I truly did not realize how much information there was until I started looking for screenshots for this class. They just aren't in video form, so I think a lot of people assume that there isn't content. It's just written with pictures.